Years after the fall of the Empire, Luke Skywalker became the last Jedi, carrying the weight of an entire millennial tradition on his shoulders. Recognized as Master Skywalker, he gradually consolidated his position as Grand Master of the new Jedi Order, rebuilding the foundations of what had been destroyed by his father and the Empire. The Free Planet saw Luke not only as a warrior, but also as a spiritual guide who could restore harmony and balance to the galaxy. His presence was respected both by the political leaders of the New Republic and by young people who dreamed of walking the path of the Force. In the process of rebuilding, Luke devoted himself to traveling to ancient sacred worlds, such as Yavin 4, in search of forgotten temples and holocrons that had survived the Jedi Purge. Each discovery revealed fragments of wisdom, secrets of the Force, and rituals that strengthened his connection to the legacy of the ancient masters. He believed that only by rescuing the past would it be possible to build a solid future for the new Jedi. With that, his name became synonymous with hope, but also with responsibility, as he was tasked with the difficult task of not repeating the mistakes that destroyed the old order. Even so, his life as Grand Master was far from peaceful. The remnants of the Empire continued to haunt the galaxy, fragmented into cells of warlords seeking to regain control. These groups did not accept defeat and constantly rose up against the New Republic, forcing Luke and his apprentices to act in defense of peace. Often, battles were fought on distant worlds, and the still reborn order suffered painful losses. With each conflict, Luke felt the burden of leading without allowing himself to be consumed by war. Another challenge arose with the unlikely return of Palpatine, who remained alive through clones and dark experiments. It was a dark period in his life. Luke also faced the pain of losing friends and companions who had helped him on his journey. Many fell to the remaining Imperial forces or walked away, unable to bear the weight of the ongoing war. Even his family suffered rifts. There were moments of betrayal within the new Jedi Order itself, when apprentices, unable to cope with the discipline or fascinated by power, abandoned the light side. This hurt Luke deeply, as he saw in these mistakes a reflection of the failures of the old order and feared repeating the cycle. It was amid this whirlwind of conflict that an unexpected reflection arose. In an intimate conversation with Leia, his sister, Luke heard from her a hypothesis that stirred his heart. Leia asked, "What if everything could have been different? What if the old Jedi Order had survived Palpatine's attack? What if the Empire had never been founded?" Leia believed that the key to changing destiny had always been linked to Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. There was no denying that the love and pain he felt for Padme were central to his downfall. Luke remained silent for a moment, but he couldn't help but agree. He knew that his mother, Padme Amidala, had been not only Anakin's great love, but also his anchor. If she had survived, perhaps history would have been completely different. Perhaps there would have been no Empire, perhaps there would have been no war. Perhaps he and Leia would have grown up alongside their parents, in peace. This thought brought both hope and melancholy. For the first time, Luke considered that the past might not be so far from being changed. Leia looked at her brother and added that if the Force was capable of uniting all destinies and crossing generations, then perhaps it could be used for more than battles. Perhaps there was a way to break the flow of time, to return to the crucial moment when Anakin was seduced. She spoke with conviction, but also with a touch of longing, for she had never known her mother. For Leia, Padme's survival could be the key not only to preventing the birth of the Empire, but also to healing the wounds that had never healed in her family. Luke realized that the idea had not come from Leia, but from the Force itself. His sister had merely been the instrument used to reveal what he needed to hear. It was a calling, not advice. This thought would not leave his mind, and the more he reflected on it, the more certain he became that he needed to seek the truth. He distanced himself from everyone and decided that he would immerse himself deeply in the Force until the answer came. It was not something that could be resolved in battles or dialogues, but only in total surrender. He left for a remote location, far from the eyes of the New Republic and distant from any contact with his apprentices. Silence was necessary, for only in solitude could he hear the voice of the Force clearly. He took only the essentials with him, trusting that nothing but his connection to the Force would be enough to guide him. There, away from everything, he began long meditations, waiting for the Force to reveal its designs. He knew that something extraordinary was about to happen. Days turned into weeks, and Luke sank deeper and deeper into states of concentration that made him lose track of time. The Force flowed through him like never before, filling him with energy and intense visions. But he soon realized that these were not just images or mental impressions. Something greater was happening. It was not his mind that saw these places, it was his entire body that moved. The Force was actually transporting him. The first time this happened, Luke believed he was dreaming. But when he looked around, he felt the wind against his face, smelled the city, felt the texture of the ground beneath his feet. There was no doubt. It was real. He wasn't just having visions, he was physically being taken by the Force to different points in space and time. The impact was profound, as he had never imagined that this level of connection was possible. These displacements were repeated. On one occasion, he found himself in vast, unknown plains. On another, he walked through ancient corridors of Jedi temples, where symbols glowed faintly on the walls. Each experience was intense and real, and Luke felt he had no choice but to surrender. The Force was guiding him, and he had to trust it. He was being led to a purpose he did not yet understand, but which pulsed strongly in his heart. During one of his long meditations, Luke felt the Force manifest itself differently. The air around him seemed to vibrate, as if time itself had torn apart for an instant. When he opened his eyes, before him lay an object that made him shudder. His old lightsaber, the same one that had belonged to Anakin Skywalker. He immediately recognized the gift given to him by his old friend Ben. As he held it, he knew that the Force had placed that relic back in his hands for a reason. He put the saber away silently, certain that the time would come when he would need it. Luke could resist no longer. He had learned over the years that the Force always had a reason for guiding his path. And now, more than ever, it was leading him to something essential. Each transport strengthened his faith and increased his certainty that a revelation was approaching. He felt as if he were passing through the deepest layers of the very fabric of reality. Something great was about to happen. Then, one night, everything changed. When he opened his eyes after diving into meditation, Luke was no longer in his lonely refuge. Suddenly, he found himself on a huge balcony, surrounded by gleaming towers that rose toward the dark sky. He immediately recognized the place, Coruscant. The city shone like a sea of infinite lights, bustling and full of life. He was breathless when he realized he had been transported there, to another time. The sight of the city amazed him. Speeders crossed the illuminated horizon, and the golden towers reflected the glow of the stars. Luke approached the edge of the balcony, looking at the landscape in amazement. He was standing before the heart of the galaxy in its most glorious era, before the fall, before the darkness. But something was different. The Force vibrated there powerfully, denser and more alive than he had ever felt. Luke's heart raced. He knew he was not alone. There were familiar presences in that energy, echoes that stirred his soul. The air seemed heavier, as if the Force had taken him exactly where it all would begin. Every nerve in his body was on alert, and the feeling of anticipation made him breathe faster. The silence on the balcony was deep, but charged with tension. Luke stood still, trying to absorb what was happening. His entire body seemed to respond to that invisible presence, as if he were about to cross a line of no return. The Force had brought him there for a specific reason, and he knew the answer was just a few steps away. His heart pounded in his chest, and with each passing moment, the pressure increased. He turned slowly, sensing that something was about to be revealed. It was at that moment that a voice echoed behind him, clear and firm, breaking the silence of the night in Coruscant. "Who are you?" The question was simple, but it struck Luke like lightning. His entire body trembled, and the air seemed to disappear from his lungs. The sound was real, not a whisper of the Force. Someone was actually there. Luke turned his body, each movement seeming to last an eternity. And when his eyes finally found the figure waiting for him, his heart almost stopped. There, before him, stood Anakin Skywalker, his father. Luke's heart could barely bear the intensity of that moment. Before him stood Anakin Skywalker in the flesh, young and vibrant, before the fall that would forever mark the galaxy. Inside, Luke felt the urge to throw himself into his father's arms and tell him the truth, but he knew he couldn't. He took a deep breath and controlled himself, understanding that the Force had a greater plan. So, bowing his head slightly, he said only that he was a former Jedi, someone the Force had brought there. His voice carried serenity, but inside, he burned with emotion at finally standing before the one he had always sought to understand. Anakin looked at him suspiciously, trying to understand the unexpected presence of this mysterious man. His stern expression betrayed his unease, and Luke immediately realized that there was something dark in his gaze. Before he could ask anything, Anakin spoke, almost as if venting. He said he had just awakened from a terrible nightmare, a vision that consumed him from within. He described in a low voice how he had seen Padme dying in childbirth, her body fading away while he watched helplessly, unable to do anything. Luke felt his chest tighten. He knew every detail of that vision, for he knew the fate that awaited his mother. Hearing this from Anakin, so young, so fragile, was like being hit by a wave of pain and tenderness at the same time. He held back his emotions with all his strength, for he could not reveal who he was. Yet every word his father spoke sounded like an open wound, and inside, Luke desperately wanted to change that future. In a calm voice, Luke placed his hand on Anakin's shoulder and said that the Force did not show visions to bring despair, but to warn. He recalled, with wisdom learned in his own training, the lessons he had heard from Yoda. The fear of loss is the path to darkness. Attachment can be a prison. One must learn to trust, to let the Force guide, and not try to control everything. Anakin stared at him silently, absorbing those words, as if he were facing a master who already knew his soul. Anakin tried to argue, saying he couldn't just accept the idea of losing Padme. The pain of the mere possibility consumed him, and the nightmare seemed so real that it was impossible to ignore. Luke felt tears sting his eyes, but he held them back. He replied firmly that true love could not be born of fear, that protecting someone did not mean controlling the future, but being present with courage in the present. His words carried the weight of experience, even if Anakin didn't know their origin. For a few moments, silence filled the balcony. Anakin leaned on the railing, looking at the lights of Coruscant, while Luke watched his father's every gesture. It was a surreal scene. A son guiding his father, even though the latter was unaware of it. Luke felt that every sentence spoken there could alter the fate of the galaxy. It was as if the Force had arranged this meeting not only to advise Anakin, but also to give Luke the chance to experience what had always been denied him. Anakin spoke again, his voice trembling, admitting that he felt lost, torn between his Jedi duty and his love for Padme. Luke replied calmly that the Force did not ask him to destroy his feelings, but to learn not to be enslaved by them. He said that a Jedi's courage came from knowing how to choose the right path, even in the face of fear. "You are not alone. The Force will always be with you," he added. Anakin closed his eyes, absorbing every word, and for the first time, a glimmer of hope crossed his face. Inside, Luke was heartbroken. Every gesture, every glance from Anakin was a belated reunion with the father he had always wanted. The urge to reveal himself was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't. The risk was too great. Still, he couldn't help feeling that this moment was a gift. He was finally able to talk to his father without barriers, to advise him, to guide him, even if Anakin didn't know who he was. It was as if the Force had given them both a second chance. The conversation continued, and Luke imparted more of the teachings he had inherited. He recalled Yoda's words that still echoed in his mind. "Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. You must." As he repeated this lesson, he felt the power of the moment. Anakin listened attentively, as if each word were a balm for his torment. It was a dialogue between master and apprentice, but also between father and son, even if only Luke was aware of it. The air seemed to carry a strange stillness after those words. Luke felt a chill run down his spine, a feeling he couldn't ignore. The Force vibrated differently, as if announcing a new revelation. His eyes fixed on the night, but his ears picked up something that made his body tremble. A soft voice, full of sweetness and firmness, calling the name that echoed in his soul. Anakin. Luke froze instantly. His heart raced like never before. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The Force already told him the truth. Even so, the moment was so grand that his hands trembled. Slowly, he turned his head, knowing exactly what he would see. And there, before him, appeared for the first time the figure he had dreamed so much of meeting. Padme Amidala, his mother. Luke felt his legs tremble as he turned and saw Padme before him. It was as if time had stopped, as if every detail, the sparkle in her eyes, the softness of her voice, the way she walked, was a gift from the Force. For the first time, he stood before his mother, alive, radiant, carrying in her womb the promise of a future he already knew. But he couldn't say anything. The words stuck in his throat, crushed by the weight of emotion. Padme, for her part, stared at him intently. There was something about his presence that seemed strangely familiar to her. She approached him, frowning, and said softly, "Have we met before? I feel like we know each other." Luke shuddered, looking away for a moment at her belly, where he knew he and Leia were growing. His heart tightened, for every glance at that belly was like seeing himself, about to be born. Anakin noticed Luke's insistent gaze and frowned. He approached Padme and wrapped his arm around her waist, as if to protect her. "Why do you ask that, Padme? This man is nothing more than a lost Jedi who appeared without explanation. We don't need to insist on anything," he said, in a tone harsher than he intended. Luke sensed his father's discomfort and the shadow of fear that enveloped him. It was clear. Anakin was tormented by the fear of losing Padme, and it was already throwing him off balance. Padme, however, did not remain silent. Lightly touching Anakin's arm, she insisted, "There's something about him. I feel like I know him. It's not just an impression." She looked back at Luke, who remained steadfast, even though he wanted to reveal everything. The scene was charged with tension, and Luke understood that Anakin's fear was so deep that it was already beginning to turn him into someone aggressive. He saw clearly how this fear, if left unchecked, would lead to his downfall. "Enough, Padme." Anakin raised his voice, looking suspiciously at Luke. "Who are you really? What are you hiding?" The intensity of his father's gaze was suffocating. Luke knew he had reached his limit. He couldn't continue to hide his origins. He took a brief breath and replied, "I was sent by the Force, from the future." The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to trap the air. Padme put her hand to her mouth in surprise, while Anakin narrowed his eyes in disbelief. "From the future?" Anakin repeated, narrowing his eyes, mistrust and anger mingling in his voice. He took a step forward, staring at Luke as if trying to pull the truth out of him. "If you are who you say you are, then show me. Prove it now." Luke took a deep breath and calmly held out his hand. His lightsaber detached from his belt, floated slowly through the air, and landed in front of Anakin. "Do you recognize this saber?" Luke asked firmly, even though his heart was racing. Anakin took the weapon, examining it closely. His eyes widened. He reached for his waist, removed his own saber, and placed the two side by side. The design was identical, but Luke's bore the marks of time, signs that it had been through battles. Anakin's breathing quickened. "It's the same lightsaber," he murmured, confused. "How did you get it?" Luke stared at him firmly. "Obi-Wan Kenobi gave it to me as a gift." The mention of the name made Anakin take a step back, his eyes filling with tension. "Obi-Wan?" he repeated, almost growling. "Why did he have the saber?" Luke looked down for a moment before answering. "Because it no longer had an owner." The silence that followed was suffocating, until Anakin's eyes widened. "Are you saying that I will die?" Padme put her hand to her chest, frightened. "No, Anakin, don't say that. But Luke didn't take his eyes off his father. "Yes," he replied firmly. "If you don't learn to control your fear of loss, it will consume you. And when that happens, it won't just be you who ceases to exist." Then, slowly, Luke looked away to Padme's belly, and his voice became heavier. "They will suffer too." Anakin paled. The fear that already gnawed at him became even more evident. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, almost breathless. Luke, his voice choked with emotion, replied, "I'm trying to say that your destiny is not set in stone, that the Force has brought me here to show you that you still have a choice. But if you give in to your fear of losing Padme, you will lose everything, including her." Padme, tears in her eyes, held Anakin's hand. "Listen to him, please. I don't know who he is, but I feel like he's telling the truth. I feel like he came to us for a reason." Anakin looked from one to the other, torn between rage and pain, and Luke could clearly see how fear was destroying his balance. It was like looking into an abyss that he knew exactly where it ended. "I can't lose her," Anakin murmured, squeezing Padme's hand tightly. Luke approached slowly and said quietly, "If you live with that fear, you will have already lost her. The future is not forged by darkness, but by the courage to trust." Silence fell between the three, interrupted only by the distant sounds of the city. Anakin was still breathing heavily, while Padme kept her eyes on Luke, trying to understand who this mysterious man really was. Luke felt his heart ache in a way he had rarely felt before. He understood that his mission was coming to an end, and that everything he could have done had already been done. The moment was painful, but inevitable. He turned to Anakin and Padme, forever storing that image in his memory. In a calm but firm tone, he said, "I have to go." He reached out to his father, asking for the lightsaber back. Anakin, still in shock from everything he had heard, slowly handed over the weapon, as if afraid to let go of something that now seemed to carry much greater meaning. As the weapon changed hands, Anakin kept his eyes fixed on Luke. A question still burned in his mind. "You said Obi-Wan gave you this lightsaber as a gift." His voice carried hesitation. "Was he your master?" Luke nodded calmly and replied, "Yes, my master and my protector, since I was born." The words echoed like an even greater revelation. Padme's heart raced, and Anakin narrowed his eyes, confused by the weight of those statements. "Protector," Anakin repeated, as if he needed to confirm that he had understood correctly. Luke took a deep breath and replied, looking at Padme's belly, "Yes, he took care of me since my mother died in childbirth." At that moment, silence fell over the balcony. Padme instinctively brought her hand to her own belly, staring at Luke with tears welling up in her eyes. It was impossible not to feel the truth behind those words. Time seemed to stand still. Luke then raised his eyes, looking directly at Padme, and allowed himself to smile slightly. It was the simplest gesture, but the most overwhelming of all. She gasped, her eyes watering, as if she had finally understood what the Force had been whispering since she first saw him. Slowly, she looked away to Anakin, who was now equally motionless, his chest heaving. In an instant, they both understood. Luke didn't have to say anything. They knew. The impact was indescribable. Anakin's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if it were difficult to process that reality. Padme brought her hand to her mouth in shock, but couldn't take her eyes off the man before her. He was implying something unthinkable, that he was their son, coming from a distant time. The weight of that revelation made the air thick, and the three remained silent, just looking at each other. It was as if words were unnecessary, but time allowed for nothing more. Before any reaction could be complete, Luke closed his eyes. He felt the Force envelop him like an irresistible current, pulling him back to his own time. His body began to disappear before the astonished eyes of Anakin and Padme, until it vanished completely. The couple stood still, breathless, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Padme was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Anakin, we saw our son." The words echoed in his mind like thunder. For long minutes, they remained silent, trying to comprehend the magnitude of that revelation. It was as if the future had opened a window before them, offering not only a warning, but also a chance. And what was most striking was that this chance had come through their own blood. Anakin slumped down on the edge of the balcony, burying his face in his hands. Luke's words and the teachings he had imparted now resounded deafeningly. The fear of loss is the path to darkness. He remembered every detail, every warning. Padme knelt beside him, holding his hand. You heard him, Anakin. The Force brought him to us. We cannot ignore it. She spoke firmly, but her heart was overflowing with emotion. That night changed everything. Anakin, with Padme's help, began to reflect on the need to control the fear that consumed him. For the first time, he saw the clear consequences his choice would bring, not only for himself, but for everyone he loved. The weight of responsibility hit him in a way that no previous advice had. Now, it was not a distant master warning him, but the very future of his family. This revelation was the trigger that began his transformation. Anakin vowed silently that he would not allow fear to dominate him, that he would protect Padme not with obsession, but with confidence, and that Yoda's teachings, mysteriously brought by Luke, would be his new direction. Padme, in turn, felt empowered, believing that the Force had chosen the most unlikely path to save them. For the first time, they both saw a different future. When Luke opened his eyes again, he was back where he had begun his meditation. The place looked the same, but something in his heart told him it wasn't. He got up and, when he went to meet Leia, he realized immediately everything had changed. She spoke of Anakin and Padme as if they were still alive, as if they had never fallen. The Jedi Order remained standing, Coruscant still shone as the seat of the Republic. It was another reality, born of his sacrifice. Luke understood. He was no longer part of that new timeline. Everything he had lived had been lost, replaced by a story in which the Chosen One did not succumb. Padme lived, Anakin remained, the Jedi Order flourished. A sad smile spread across his face. He had given up his own history so that his family would have a chance to live, so that the galaxy would have a chance to start over. And in the silence of his soul, he accepted it. That had been his true destiny.